There are three sounds a man never forgets on a ranch in winter. The first is the wind, because the wind out here does not blow, it searches, like it's looking for a way into your bones. The second is the silence after the wind stops, which is worse, because silence out here means something is about to happen. The third sound I only heard once in my whole life. It was a knock, three of them. Small, knuckle-soft, the kind of knock a person makes when they are trying very hard not to be a burden even as they beg for their life. I opened that door expecting the wind. What I found on my step was a woman half frozen, half starved, and wholly certain that I was going to turn her away because everyone else already had. She asked me for work, just work. Not charity, not pity, not a warm bed. Work. And what I said back to her, well, I've told this story maybe 4 times in 30 years, and every time I get to that part, I have to stop and pour myself a drink first. Because my answer was the single most important thing I ever said, and I almost didn't say it at all. Let me tell you how a knock on a cowboy's door changed 2 lives that neither of us thought were worth saving. The dog didn't bark, and that's what got me up out of my chair. Old Marshall barked at everything, jackrabbits, tumbleweed, his own shadow crossing the porch at noon. But that night he was quiet, and quiet from Marshall meant one of 2 things. Either whatever was out there wasn't a threat, or it was a threat so far beyond his understanding that the fight had gone right out of him. I'd learned to fear the second kind more. I set down my ledger. I always kept a ledger head count of the cattle, price of feed, weather, the small arithmetic of a small life. My late wife Cora used to laugh at me for it. "You'll write down the day you die," she said once, "just so the numbers balance." She wasn't far wrong. That January of 1887 I'd taken to leaving blank lines at the bottom of each page, though I couldn't have told you what I was saving them for. A man gets superstitious when he lives alone long enough. The knock came before I reached the door. 3 of them, barely there. If the wind hadn't dropped in that exact moment, I might have missed it entirely, and everything after would have gone another way. I took the rifle down from above the door out of pure habit, not because I meant to use it, and I lifted the latch. She was standing in the snow with her arms wrapped around herself like she was the only thing holding her own body together. A blanket over her shoulders, soaked through and stiff at the edges with ice. No shoes I could see under the hem of her skirt. She'd wrapped her feet in strips of hide that had come half undone. Her face was a young face made old by whatever she'd been walking through. And she was Apache. I knew it the way you know weather. The set of her, the black of her hair. The way she held my eyes instead of lowering them the way a beggar's supposed to. That was 1887, understand. 10 months after Geronimo laid down his rifle at Skeleton Canyon. The papers had been full of it, the last of the Chiricahua loaded onto trains and shipped clear across the country to Florida, to rot in the wet heat of a fort by the sea. Men, women, children, the ones who'd fought and the ones who'd never lifted a hand. All of them gone east on the railroad. The territory was supposed to be cleared. That was the word they used in town, like she was a field and someone had come through with a plow. So a young Apache woman standing on my porch in the dead of winter was not a thing that was supposed to exist. She was a ghost of a war that was already being written into books as finished. I should have been afraid, part of me was, but mostly I remember being tired in that bone-deep way and thinking, she's more frozen than I am scared. "I can work," she said. Not hello, not please, not don't shoot. Just those 3 words in English clear enough that I knew somebody had taught her and taught her well. "I can work," she said again when I didn't answer. "You have cattle, fences. I saw the fences down along the wash. I can mend, I can cook, clean, I can do books if you have them. I don't eat much. I won't be seen if you don't want me seen." She got all that out in one breath, and the breath was shaking. "Just work, that's all I'm asking. I'll take the barn, I don't need the house." I stood there with the door open, and the cold pouring past me into my kitchen, and the rifle in my hand pointed at the floor, and I did not know what to do. Here is a thing about that moment I've never told anyone, not even the drink. I was not thinking about her, not really. I was thinking about the last time somebody had stood on that porch asking to come in, and that had been the doctor from Willow Bend, 3 years prior, come to tell me there was nothing more he could do for Cora and I'd best send for the preacher. I hadn't opened the door that night either, not fast enough. I'd stood behind it the way I was standing now, and by the time I let him in it hadn't mattered. Some doors you learn to open quicker after that, or you die a little slower behind them. "You'll freeze," I said. It was the stupidest thing I could have said. It wasn't yes, and it wasn't no. "I know," she said. And she just stood there. waiting, not begging harder, not falling to her knees, none of the theater a person might expect. She'd said her piece. Now it was mine to decide whether she lived or died, and she knew it, and she wasn't going to make it easy on me by weeping. There was a pride in that so sharp it almost cut me. Here she was with nothing left in the whole world but the asking, and even the asking she did standing up. I've turned that over 1,000 times since. Where does a person find that? To walk however many miles she'd walked, past however many doors, to be turned away God knows how many times, and still arrive at the next one with your spine straight and your voice level. I've faced down bad winters and worse debts and a wife dying in the next room, and I don't know that I've got that in me. Most days I don't think I do. Marshall, the old fool, chose that moment to walk out from behind my legs and sniff her frozen hand. And she didn't flinch from the dog, didn't reach to pet him for my benefit either. She just let him decide about her. And he decided. He leaned his whole gray weight against her shins the way he used to lean on Cora, and something in her face broke, just for a second, before she pulled it back together. That's what did it, not her words, the dog. Get in here before I change my mind, I said, and mind the step, it's iced. I want to tell you I said it kind. I didn't. I said it rough, almost angry, because I was angry at the cold, at the war, at the doctor 3 years gone, at myself for standing behind another door. But she came in anyway. She'd learned to hear past the roughness of a man's voice to whatever mercy was hiding under it. God knows she'd had to. Inside, in the lamplight, she was worse than she'd looked in the dark. There was frostbite starting at the tips of 2 fingers, gone waxy and white. Her lips had a color lips shouldn't have. When I got the blanket off her shoulders, she let me, watching my hands the whole time, ready to bolt. I saw she was thinner than a body should be and still be walking. I did what Cora would have done. Put her by the stove, but not too close, because you warm a frozen person slow or you kill them faster than the cold would have. Wrapped her feet. Got a cup of coffee into her, then broth, then more broth, and made her drink it slow while she stared at the flames like she'd forgotten fire could be a friend, and not just a thing men lit to burn your home down. She didn't say thank you. I was glad. Thank you would have made it charity, and I could see charity was the one thing she couldn't stomach. What she said instead, after the shaking eased, was, I meant it about the work. This isn't I'm not asking for your pity. In the morning I'll show you. Whatever you need done, I'll do it, and I'll do it better than a man you'd have to pay. It's the middle of January, I said. Nothing needs doing that can't wait for you to have 10 toes again. Everything needs doing, she said quietly. A ranch this size, one man. Your barn door hangs wrong, your woodpile's low, half your fence is in the wash. You've got a linta full of tack that hasn't been oiled since. She stopped. She'd seen it. The woman's touch gone from the place. The 3 years of a man not caring whether the leather cracked. Since a while, she finished, kinder than she'd started. She wasn't wrong about any of it. That was the thing that unsettled me most. She'd walked up my drive half dead and cataloged my whole failing life in the time it took to reach the porch. I asked her name. She looked at me a long moment, weighing it. I understand now what she was weighing, that a name is a thing you can be hunted by, that the wrong name given to the wrong man could put her on a train to Florida or worse. In that pause was every reason she had not to trust me, and there were a great many. Rose, she said finally, the mission called me Rose. It wasn't her name. I knew it wasn't, the way you know a coat that doesn't fit the man wearing it. But I also knew better than to reach for the true one before it was offered. Some things you have to be given. You can't take them and have them mean anything. All right, Rose, I said. I'm Elia's ward. This is Marshall, and he's already made his choice about you, so I suppose I'm outvoted. That got the ghost of something across her mouth, not a smile, but the country a smile might come from. You'll take Cora's, you'll take the small room off the kitchen. It's warm from the stovepipe, not the barn. I'll not have it said I put a person in the barn in January. People will say worse than that, she said, about you keeping me at all. And there it was, the whole shape of what I'd just walked into, laid out plain by the one person in the room who understood it better than I did. Because she was right. I knew what it would mean. Willow Bend was a town that had lost sons to the Apache Wars, real sons, buried ones, and grief like that doesn't ask whether the woman in front of it ever held a weapon. To half the county, taking her in wasn't mercy. It was treason. There were men in that town who'd ridden with the volunteers, who'd done things in the name of clearing the territory that they told themselves were justice. And those men would not take kindly to learning that Elia's ward had a Chiricahua sleeping under his roof. doing his books, warm by his stove. I thought about all of that, standing in my own kitchen. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to feed her through the worst of the cold and send her on come thaw with a pair of Cora's old boots and a sack of provisions and my conscience mostly clean. That was the reply she was braced for. I could see it in how she held the cup, like she already knew the answer, like she'd only knocked because the alternative was lying down in the snow, and she was cataloging my kindness now the way you'd count your last coins, knowing they wouldn't stretch to morning. Here is what I said instead. Here is the reply, the one I have to pour a drink to tell. I said, then let them say it. She went very still. You mend my fences, I said, and oil my tack and do my books if the numbers won't sit still for me, and I'll not send you off come spring like a hired hand at the end of a season. This isn't a season's work, Rose. Place is falling down around my ears, and I'm too proud and too tired to have said so out loud until you walked up and said it for me. You want work. There's a life's worth of it here, and a roof, and a man who buried the only person who ever leaned on him and hasn't had a soul to talk to since but a dog who doesn't answer back. I hadn't meant to say the last part. It came out on its own the way the true things do. I'm not offering you a job, I said. I'm offering you a place, if you'll take it. And if they want to ride out here and tell me I can't, they're welcome to try their luck with a man who's got nothing left to lose and a rifle over the door. For the first time since she'd knocked, Rose had nothing to say. She'd walked all that way with an answer ready for every door, a reason, a bargain, a way to make herself small enough to be allowed. She had no answer ready for this one. She opened her mouth and closed it. Her eyes went bright and she looked away fast at the fire so I wouldn't see, and I looked away too at the ledger on the table so she wouldn't have to be seen. Outside the wind had come back up, searching the eaves looking for a way in. But the door was shut, and for the first time in 3 winters, there were 2 people on the warm side of it. I opened the ledger that night after she'd gone to the small room. Same as always. Head count, weather, the small arithmetic. And at the bottom of the page, on one of those blank lines I'd been saving without knowing why, I wrote a single word. Rose. Then I sat there a while, looking at it, knowing it was the wrong name, and knowing too that I'd just written down the first true thing on that line in 3 years. Even if it was a lie, it was her lie, and she'd chosen to bring it to my door instead of dying with it in the snow. I'd find out the right name in time. That's the thing about the true ones. You have to be given them, and she wasn't ready, not yet. She was up before me the next morning, and the barn door hung right. I don't know how she did it with 2 frostbit fingers and feet that had to have been screaming. But I came out at first light with the coffee still deciding whether to be coffee, and the door that had scraped and sagged for 3 years swung clean and true on its hinge. And Rose was already down at the wash with a fence rail across her shoulder like she meant to argue the whole territory back into order 1 board at a time. You'll open those fingers up, I called down. They're my fingers, she called back and set the rail. That was the shape of the first weeks. Her, stubborn as frozen ground, doing the work of 2 men and refusing to be thanked for it. Me, following behind, half the time trying to slow her down and half the time just watching, because I hadn't seen my own ranch cared for in so long I'd forgotten what it looked like when somebody gave a damn. She did the tack the second day. Oiled every strap of it, worked the cracked leather soft again, hung it in order. Found things I'd lost, a bridle Cora had braided, a pair of good gloves gone stiff behind a beam. She didn't say anything when she found the braided bridle. Just set it apart from the rest on its own peg higher where it wouldn't get used and worn. She knew what it was without asking. A woman leaves a mark on leather same as she leaves it on a house, and Rose could read both. The books, though, the books were where I understood I'd taken in something more than a hard worker. I brought her the ledger the second week, half as a test, half because the numbers genuinely wouldn't sit still for me and never had. She turned the pages slow, and I watched her go quiet over them, and I thought maybe she'd been lying about the reading after all, that maybe pride had made her claim more than she had. Then she said, "You're paying too much for feed." "It's the price," I said. "It's the price he charges you," she said. "The man in town. Look," and she showed me 3 winters of it, the same supplier, the number creeping up a little each season while the market price, she said, had been falling. She knew the market price. Don't ask me how a Chiricahua woman who'd walked out of a war knew the falling price of winter feed in the Arizona territory, but she did, and she was right, and she just found me money I didn't know I was bleeding. The mission had taught her, she said when I asked. Reading, figures, English. She'd been there some years as a girl before. She didn't say before what. I didn't ask. We were both getting good at the not asking. It was the only currency we had that we could afford to spend freely. Here's the thing about two lonely people and a hard winter. The silence between them stops being a wall and starts being a room. We took to eating together. Not by any decision, it just would have been foolish not to. One stove, one pot. She'd cook some nights, food I didn't have names for, and it was better than anything I'd made for myself in 3 years. I'd cook others badly, and she'd eat it without complaint, and then quietly fix whatever I'd done wrong the next time she was at the stove. Marshall slept in her doorway now, not mine. I pretended that didn't sting a little. It stung a little. I learned the small things. That she hummed when she worked and stopped the second she caught herself, like humming was a thing she wasn't allowed. That she couldn't sit with her back to a door. That she flinched at the sound of horses on the road before I ever heard them, her whole body going still and listening in a way that told you her ears had been trained by something worse than caution. She'd be laughing at Marshall 1 second. She did laugh, low and surprised, like it took her by ambush. And the next she'd be a stone listening until the rider passed on down the road and didn't turn up my drive. I didn't have to be told what she was listening for. Because it came, of course it came. It was Halloran who came first. Big man ran the mercantile, sat on whatever passed for a town council in Willow Bend. He'd lost a brother in the '82 raids, and he'd never once let the county forget it. He rode out on a gray afternoon with 2 other men behind him, and Rose was in the barn, and I met them in the yard with my hands loose at my sides and Marshall growling low behind my knee. Elias, Halloran said, friendly as a man can be when he's come to threaten you. Heard a story in town, figured it for a lie. Then you rode a long way to check on a lie, I said. Man says he saw a squaw down at your wash, mending fence. He let the word sit there, squaw, ugly and deliberate. Man must be mistaken. On account of there's no Apache left in this territory that ain't in Florida or in the ground. And Elias Ward's a decent man, wouldn't shelter one of them murdering. Her name's Rose, I said. She works for me, she does it better than any hand you could send me. The friendliness went out of his face like water out of a cracked jug. You know what they did, he said quiet. You know what they did to my brother, to the Pearsons, to that family down at Cedar Draw, the children, Elias, the children. I know what was done, I said. By men, in a war. That woman in my barn was a girl at a mission school when your brother died, Halloran. She didn't lift a hand to anybody. And you'd load her on a train for the crime of surviving a thing she never chose to be born into. She's one of them. She's one of God's, I said, and I don't know where it came from. I'm not a churchy man, but it came out with the whole weight of Cora behind it. Cora who'd have had this woman in for coffee and shamed the lot of them off her porch. Same as your brother. Same as you. You want to argue theology, ride to Willow Bend and fetch the preacher, and I'll argue it with him and you both. But you'll not take a soul off my land while I'm standing on it. There was a long moment where it could have gone bad. One of the men behind Halloran had his hand near his belt. Marshall's growl climbed. And I stood there with no weapon but my own 2 hands and the plain fact that I meant it. And I have never in my life been more aware of the rifle sitting uselessly over my door 40 feet behind me. It was Halloran who broke it. He spat in the dust, wheeled his horse. You've gone soft in the head living out here alone, he said. Or she's put something in your coffee these people know ways. Either road, Elias, this ain't finished. There's men in this county won't stand for it. Marshal Deakins hears there's a Chiricahua off the reservation. That's a federal matter, and it'll be out of my hands and yours. He looked past me at the barn and raised his voice so it'd carry. You hear me, girl? Best you run tonight. Save this fool the trouble of burying his good name over you. They rode off. I stood in the yard until the dust settled and my hands would quit shaking, and when I turned around, Rose was in the barn doorway, and she'd heard all of it, and there was a bundle already in her arms. She'd packed while we talked. Of course she had. She'd been packing her whole life. You should let me go, she said that night. She said it at the stove, not looking at me, her hands busy with nothing. He's right about the marshal. If Deakins comes, it won't be a conversation in your yard. It'll be chains, and it'll be a fine for you, or worse, harboring. They can call it harboring. Let them call it what they want. Elias, she turned, and it was the first time she'd used my given name, and it landed harder than Halloran's whole visit. I have cost men their lives by staying too long in a warm place. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I know how this goes. I have watched it go. You are a good man, and good men are exactly the kind this territory buries. And then it came out of her, not all of it, but enough. She told me she'd had a husband, that she'd had a she stopped on that word and started again around it, and I understood there'd been a child, and I understood not to make her say it plain. She told me about the trains. She'd been on one. She'd gotten off one, somewhere in the New Mexico territory, in the confusion of a night when a car had been uncoupled wrong, and she'd walked. She'd walked from there. I did the miles in my head and had to stop, because the miles didn't make sense with a person who lived at the end of them. She'd walked because there was one thing left that she was walking toward. A sister, sent west before the surrender, married off to a freighter's outfit, last known to be somewhere past the mountains north of us. That was the whole of Rose's plan for her one remaining life, to walk until she found the last person on earth who shared her blood, and if she found her, to stand next to her, and if she didn't, to keep walking until the walking stopped on its own. My ranch had just been a door on the way. The warmest one, the first that had opened. So you see, she said, I can't stay, I was never staying, and now staying gets you killed as well as me, and I've buried enough people who opened doors for me. She said it flat, empty. The way you say a thing you've made yourself believe so it'll stop hurting, and it hasn't worked, and you say it anyway. Here was the heavy part. Here was the thing I had to decide, and I want to be honest that I decided it slow and selfishly, and that I'm not proud of the first thing I felt. Because the first thing I felt was, don't go purely that, selfish as a child. 3 years of a house like a held breath, and then her humming in my barn and Marshall in her doorway, and the numbers finally sitting still. And every part of me that had been cold since Cora just wanted to say stay. Forget the sister, forget the north. Stay here and be warm and let me not be the last man alone at this table. I didn't say it. That's the one thing in this whole story I did right. I didn't say it because I looked at her face when she said her sister's name, and I saw that Rose staying warm and safe and dead-hearted in my kitchen was not the same as Rose living, and I had no right, none, to be one more thing that stood between her and the north. North, I said instead. How far north's the last you heard of her? She blinked. That wasn't the argument she'd braced for. Past the Mogollon, a freight town called Red Fork, or it was 3 years gone. She watched me careful. Why? Because you'll die walking it in January, I said. And I've got horses, and I know a man in Red Fork who owes me from a cattle deal, and I know 3 passes through the Mogollon that a marshal's posse wouldn't think to watch because they're too green to know the country the way an old cattleman does. I got up, got the ledger. Not to write in it, to tear the back page out because I was about to do arithmetic I didn't want a record of. I'm not asking you to stay, Rose, I heard you. But I'll be damned if I let you walk to your sister and die in a pass with 50 miles to go. You knocked on my door asking for work. Well, getting you north's the work. Let me finish the job I hired on for. She stared at me, the fire popped. Marshall's tail went once against the floor. They'll know it was you, she said. When Deakins comes and finds an empty barn and my tracks gone north on a shod horse, he'll know exactly whose horse and whose knowledge of the passes, and there is no piece of that road where the danger falls on me and not on you. You understand that? You're not a stupid man, so don't pretend this is just finishing a job. Tell me the true reason you're willing to ride into that. And I couldn't, that's the truth of it. I stood there with the torn page in my hand, and I could not say the true reason out loud. Because the true reason was a tangle of Cora and loneliness, and the doctor at the door 3 years gone, and something newer and more frightening that I had no business feeling and less business naming. So I said the only true thing I could get past my own teeth. Because 3 years ago I stood behind a door too long, I said, and by the time I opened it, it didn't matter anymore. I don't aim to do that twice. That's the reason. Take it or leave it, but it's the true one. Rose looked at me for a long time. Then she set down the bundle she'd been holding since Halloran rode off, set it down slow, on the table, like laying down a weight she'd carried so long her arms had forgotten how to be empty. We leave before the moon's up tomorrow, she said, and Elia's. She picked the braided bridle off its high peg, the one she'd set apart Cora's, and she held it out to me, and I understood it was not a question and not quite a gift, but something in between that neither of us had a word for. If we're riding, she rides with us, whoever she was. I won't put my life ahead of a good horse wearing a dead woman's work. We'll all 3 go north, or none of us. I took the bridle. Outside, for the first time in a week, the wind had gone quiet. And in the quiet I heard it far off, down the Willow Bend Road, faint but unmistakable in the cold, still air. Horses, more than 3, moving at a pace no friendly caller keeps in the dark. Rose heard them before I finished hearing them. She was already moving. We didn't run. That was the first thing she taught me in the dark of that yard, and it saved us. Every part of me wanted to throw a saddle and go hard north, put miles between us and the sound of those horses. Rose caught my arm. Her grip was iron. "They're coming to the ranch," she whispered. "Not tracking, coming, they don't know we've heard them. A man who runs makes dust, and dust makes tracks, and tracks make a hanging. We don't run, we leave, quiet, slow. And we let them arrive at an empty house, and waste an hour being certain we're still in it. So we didn't run. God help me, with a posse a mile off in the dark, we walked the horses out the back of the barn, wrapped in blankets to muffle the shod hooves on the frozen ground. And we went not north but west first, into the wash, down the low ground where the sound wouldn't carry and the dark was deepest. And only when we'd put a ridge between us and my own lamplit windows did we turn the horses' heads to the North Star. Behind us, faint, I heard Marshall start to bark. Real barking now, the everything barking at the men riding into my yard. I'd left him. Rose had made me leave him. A dog that goes silent tells them we knew. A dog that barks at strangers tells them we didn't. And it was the smallest cruelty of that whole night, and somehow the one that closed my throat. Old fool. Doing his job to the last, covering our tracks with his noise, never knowing he was doing it. I never saw Marshall again. I'll get that out of the way now so you're not waiting on it. Some things the story doesn't give back. 3 days through the Mogollon. I knew those passes the way you know your own hands, from 20 years of chasing strayed cattle into country God built specifically to lose things in. Deakins and his men knew the roads. That was the whole of our advantage, and we spent it careful. We rode the high, thin trails where the wind scoured the snow off the rock and left no print. We slept cold, no fire, in the lee of boulders with the horses between us and the wind. We ate what I'd grabbed off my own shelves in the dark, and it wasn't enough, and neither of us said so. Rose rode like she'd been born on a horse, and maybe she had. She rode the braided bridle horse, Cora's bridle. I'd not swapped it. Some superstition wouldn't let me, and I'll tell you it did something to me I can't put right in words, to see a woman I was learning to see her, wearing my dead wife's work through country that could kill us both. Cora would have liked her. That's the thought I kept having on those high, cold trails, absurd, unhelpful, true. Cora would have liked her. 2 stubborn women who'd have ganged up on me inside a week. On the second night, high up, with the whole territory spread black and silver below us and no fire and our breath freezing on the blankets, Rose told me the rest of it. The child. She said the name. I won't write the name here. She gave it to me, and it wasn't mine to spend. It was hers, the way her own true name would turn out to be. But she said it out loud for the first time since Florida, up there in the dark where only the mountains and I could hear. And then she was quiet a long time, and then she said, "That's twice now I've said a name I thought I'd never say again. Yours was the first, his the second." She didn't cry. I think she'd used up crying somewhere back down the years. She just laid the names down in the cold like a person setting stones on a grave. And I lay next to her, and did the only thing I knew how to do, which was be one more body between her and the wind. I did not touch her. I want that understood. It wasn't that kind of thing, or it was, but it was buried so deep under the graver thing that neither of us would have dishonored the graver thing by naming it. There'd be time for the other, maybe, at the end of the North. Or there wouldn't. That was the wager we were both riding toward, and neither of us would say it. They caught us on the 3rd day, almost. The last pass down into the Red Fork Valley is a narrow shelf of trail with a cliff wall on one side and a long fall on the other. And we were most of the way down it when I heard the horses on the switchback above, and knew Deakins had guessed the country better than I'd given him credit for. Or worse. That some cattleman in Willow Bend who knew these passes as well as I did had told him where a smart man would run. There wasn't room to run, not on that shelf. Get to the valley floor and it was open ground and fresh horses would win, and theirs were fresher. We'd ridden ours to the bone. Rose knew it the same second I did. She always knew things the same second I did. That was the terrible closeness of those 3 days. "How far to the freight town?" she said, flat, already calculating. 2 miles once we're off the shelf, but they'll take us on the flat before we... Not if they're stopped on the shelf. She was looking back up the trail, at the narrow neck of it, at a stack of loose scree above where the wall had crumbled, the kind of slope that's been waiting 100 years for one good reason to come down. I saw her see it. I saw her do the arithmetic that I'd spent my whole life doing in a ledger, except her numbers were lives. No, I said, because I already knew. Rose, no. One horse can bring that down across the trail, she said, calm as feed prices. Behind us, they can't pass. By the time they ride around, it's a day's loss, and you and I are gone into the valley, and I am with my sister, and nobody hangs Elia's ward for harboring a woman nobody can find. She was already turning her horse, Cora's horse. It only takes one of us to drive the horse up under the scree and back it out. But it takes the person who does it staying on the shelf a minute longer than is safe. And that minute, she looked at me, and there was the ghost country of that first almost smile. That minute I'll not spend on you, Elias, because you have a ranch and a name and a life to go back to, and I have a sister 2 miles down and nothing behind me but graves. Let me count this one. I'm better at the numbers. You said so yourself. I did not let her. I want to say I stopped her with wisdom, with some argument that turned it. I didn't. I stopped her the only way that works on a person like Rose, which is I stopped being reasonable first. I put my horse across the trail in front of hers, and I said the true reason. Finally, the one I couldn't get past my teeth in the kitchen 3 nights before. I said I didn't open the door for the work. She went still. You knocked and I opened it, and I told myself it was Christian charity and a hard winter. And it was a lie, Rose. It was a lie the second Marshal leaned on your shins the way he used to lean on her. You didn't walk up to a rancher who needed a hand. You walked up to a dead man's door, and you were the first thing in 3 years that made me want to be alive on the other side of it. So no, you don't get to spend that minute. I'll not have my life bought with it. If it comes down, we bring it down together and we both ride out, or we both. And that was as far as I got, because that was when the mountain decided for us. Deakins' lead rider came around the switchback at a canter, saw us and hauled up hard, and the hard stop of a heavy horse on rotten trail did in 1 second what neither of us had been willing to do to the other. The shelf gave, not the scree above. The trail itself, the rotten lip of it under the posse's horses, a whole section of it just went with a sound I still hear, a deep wet crack like the world clearing its throat, and then the roar. We were past it, by a length, by Cora's bridle length. The section that fell was the section they were on, and I will not tell you what I saw because I've spent 30 years trying not to see it. And I'll only say that the mountain settled a debt that night that Rose had been about to pay with her own life, and it settled it without asking either of us to choose. 2 men and their horses went down with the shelf. Deakins wasn't one of them. He was still back on the switchback, and I heard him shouting, and the shouting got smaller as we rode, because there was no trail left between him and us, and there wouldn't be for a day at least, and by then we were down, on the flat, 2 miles to Red Fork, and no one behind us but the dead and a marshal on the wrong side of a broken mountain. We found the sister. I'll give you that much, because Rose earned it, and so did you for listening this long. There was a freight town called Red Fork, and there was a woman in it with Rose's face worn 10 years harder, and I stood back by the horses and watched 2 people who'd each believed they were the last of their blood on the earth find out, in a muddy street, that they were wrong. I won't describe it. It wasn't mine to watch, and I watched anyway, and then I made myself look at the horses instead. Here is where the story is supposed to tell you I rode home a changed man, or that Rose and I, that the other thing, the buried thing, the 2 miles past the north thing. It didn't go like that. She stayed, of course she stayed. Her sister, her blood, the whole reason for every mile that was north, and I was south, a ranch and a name and a life to go back to exactly like she'd said on the shelf. I stayed 4 days in Red Fork. On the 4th, she gave me back Cora's bridle, and I told her to keep the horse and the bridle both, and she wouldn't, and I made her, and that was the argument I won. And on the morning I rode out, she stood in the freight town street the same way she'd stood on my porch that first night, spine straight, chin up, not making it easy on either of us by weeping, and she told me her name. Her true one, the one you have to be given. I'll not write it here. I told you at the start there was a thing I'd only tell 4 times, and I lied a little. There are 2 things, and the second one I've never told anyone, and I'm not about to start with a ledger. She gave it to me in that street, and it's mine, and it's the last true thing on the last blank line, and some numbers a man keeps for himself, so the account never quite closes. I rode home, Deakins never came. Halloran never spoke to me again, which suited us both. I got another dog, I never named him Marshall, some names you don't reuse. And every winter since, when the wind comes searching the eaves, I get up out of my chair before old Marshall. Before the new dog, I mean, I still call him the wrong thing before he can bark. and I open the door, and I stand there a while in the cold with it open, looking north. I don't know what I'm waiting for. I'm too old now to walk to it and too stubborn to stop looking.